What's up, everybody? Welcome to day 25 of the All About How podcast from growingau.com. As always, I'm your host, John Knott. You can find me on social media at johnknottau, and I'm ready to bring you a super value-packed episode today. We're going to be talking about the power of you, the indistinguishable X-Factor advantage that you have over all the other 7 billion people on the planet, something that nobody can ever take away from you, and something that can absolutely be leveraged to be highly successful. So let's go ahead, let's roll the intro, and we're going to be talking about a topic that is going to significantly help you make the world a better place.
It's all about how in 2020 we're going to leave the world a better place than we found it.
So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about an idea from the podcast Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr. and Andy Ratcliffe. And in that podcast, they were talking about the idea of aligning a startup with their proper market. And one of the things that they talk about in having the ability to start a successful startup company is you have to identify some sort of need that needs to be fulfilled. Essentially, you have to identify a desperate market of individuals that needs to be catered to and taken care of, and your product, your service, whatever it is your company is offering will handle and solve their problem. That is one of the key aspects to being successful as an entrepreneur, at least in this situation. But it's really kind of the key aspect to being successful in any field, is figuring out what really isn't being done and how can I now bring that out to the desperate market that needs it. Okay, that's number one. The other thing they talk about in that podcast, and I find this podcast invaluable. I've referenced it multiple times now in this series, so I definitely recommend you go and check it out. But the other thing they talk about that's equally important is the idea that to be successful, you have your cliched but true 2x2 matrix, and you're either right or you're wrong, or you're consensus and you're non-consensus. The idea here is that if you're wrong, you don't make money either way because nobody needs what it is you're talking about. You're wrong. But if you're right and you're consensus, which means that what you are offering the people, the entire population says, yes, that would be a good idea. We should definitely have that. You're also not going to make money. So what's an example of right and consensus? And this might be a bit of a rudimentary example, but let's think of something like bottled water, okay? It would make sense that we should have a bottled water easily accessible to the public. To think that now you don't necessarily need to have access to a spigot, a spout, a faucet. You don't need to have access to a purified water system. There's places that may not have that. So it can be said that the idea of having purified bottled water is a smart idea. Now, if you were to take the purified bottled water example and think about everyone now that has the ability to start a purified water company. So this is everyone that is within the environment that has the ability and we're gonna say both financially, intellectually, and physically the ability to start that company. So what I mean by that is we're gonna exclude basically everybody that has situations that predicate more of their energy beyond starting a business. So what does that mean? For everyone that's in this pool of the ability to start a water bottle company, you would have to then eliminate the people from that pool that have significant hurdles ahead of them before they can even start focusing on starting a company. That example would be people in extreme poverty. The people who are in extreme poverty have in some ways a lot more to focus on than trying to start the next successful idea or company, right? So those people we can't necessarily include in the pool of everyone that has the ability to start this new company, because there's just some people that have other things that need to get done before having that ability. Very simply, another thing is there's a lot of us in here and listening to this podcast right now that may not have the financial or network ability to go out and start the next like Tom Ford, for example, or the next like General Motors. We just don't have that ability with our current status. So that explains we have multiple hurdles we have to essentially contend with before we can really count ourselves in that pool of people who have the ability to create something. So the people that are financially capable, mentally capable, and physically capable of creating let's say bottled water too. They have the ability to essentially come up with the idea and execute the process to make that idea profitable. So you're essentially now, if we are right in consensus, everybody in that pool, everybody in the pool who could theoretically start this company is in agreement that it would be a good idea. And if everybody in the pool is in agreement that it's going to be a good idea, there's going to be very little barrier to entry for a bunch of Me Too entrepreneurs and a bunch of Me Too venture capitalists saying that, we're going to jump on this too. So you may have been the individual with the initial insight that says, hey, we should bottle purified water. But then what's going to happen is everybody around you who is, again, of the same natured kind of mindset to start a business, and that is what they are thinking about doing to make money, it would make sense that a number of them are going to go and try to compete with you. And some of them may be able to compete better because they have better venture capitalists, they have more funding, they have more network, they have more resources. There are some unfair advantages in that field. What is proposed by Andy Radcliffe in the Starting Greatness podcast is he proposes that if you are right, so meaning that your product, your idea will serve a purpose and there is a need for it in society, obviously that need not being yet tapped, which is basically the difference between being right and wrong about whether or not you are accurate in your assessment that there is a market-wide need. But if you are right and you are non-consensus, what's going to end up happening is that you'll have your initial insight, you will start the company, but then everyone around you who is also of the mindset and capability of starting those companies as well are less likely to then go and start that company and compete with you because of the fact that they don't think you're going to be right. A very simple example of this is Uber. 15 years ago, you probably could have walked up to 4 out of 5 people on the street and asked them, hey, do you think that independent taxi service where you ride in people's personal cars would be a good idea? Good chance that a lot of people are going to say, no, not at all. I wouldn't want to ride in someone else's car. There's people, or like if you look at a company, let's jump on the other side of things like Airbnb. Do you think it'd be a good idea to go and stay in somebody else's home on a trip? People are going to say, heck no, I'm not doing that. But now those are 2 of the most successful companies of today because they were right. There is a need. They found that we talked about. There was a need in the market. There was a desperate small subgroup of people that needed this product. They marketed those group of people. They were right that it would be a kind of a universal good, if you will, like it's going to help a large portion of the market in which it was intended. And then those people are going to be sooner and more likely to come over and adopt the product. That being your pragmatists, your essentially conservatives, and everybody past them, your laggers, right? So all of them are going to come over because your initial insight was right, all right? So now that we've defined both of those terms, and they talk about it all being around the insight, is the right and non-consensus, meaning it hasn't been done before, or maybe it has been done before, but now's the better time. That they have a whole series of questions you have to ask yourself to actually determine whether or not your idea is going to be right and non-consensus, whether or not you're going to have product market fit, and there's a bunch of factors that play into that. So if we think about that scenario for operating a successful, let's just say, business, social media account, or anything that we wish to grow, it is more likely that we will be successful if nobody else yet has fulfilled the need or the niche in which we wish to operate. It's a bit of a tongue twister. It's more likely to be successful if nobody has filled that niche. But is there a unspoken advantage that everybody has that will and potentially allow for a higher level of success beyond just having a niche filled? And so I think there is, depending on the situation. So obviously in the very beginning of this podcast, I said we're talking about the X factor of you, right? There was something, it's just something about the way you say it, man. It's just something about the way you do it. It's just something about the way that you present the material. It's just something about you. I can't tell what it is, but I just like listening to you, even though there's maybe 150 people talking and doing the same thing. Man, I don't know. I just like the one that you produce. I just like, the pair of shoes that you put out. And I just like your website. And it's all these things where, okay, there's a lot of other stuff existing in the field, but for some reason, for some unspoken reason, I don't even want to say that you're necessarily doing it better, because we're not necessarily talking about doing something better or worse. We're talking about the intrinsic advantage of just being you and having the ability and courage to imbue your own I'm just going to say essence, characteristics onto the project, and how that can give you an advantage over everybody else, because there's not going to be a lot of other people with those exact same advantages. We can get into the conversation of, that being products of our social and, economic environments, and whether or not that's right or wrong. That is definitely not the purpose of this podcast. But those, we can talk about those things. But for the most part, there's no one else out there who is you. There's going to be a lot of people with similar traits, similar ideologies, but you are you. And there's just going to be a certain way about you that is going to lend itself well to whatever field that you are choosing to operate. That is why you see a lot of these success-based books talking about figuring out, okay, what am I super passionate about? What can I be the best at? And now how can I dedicate and focus all my time to doing that one thing? Because most likely, if you're passionate about it, you're going to be willing to put in the work to be the best at it. And if you're passionate about it and putting in the work to be the best at it, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to see through that work that you are passionate about it, and that they're going to like the way that you're passionate about it over the way somebody else is passionate about it. And it's not to say that anybody else is doing anything wrong, and it's not even necessarily to say that you're doing anything right. It's just a simple X factor of success that I think does need to be taken into consideration. I think there's a lot of factors that predict the likelihood of success, and we have to kind of think about all of those, because I think if we think about all of those, we have an easier time of using them to our advantage when appropriate. I do not think it would be a smart endeavor to go into any creative or entrepreneurial endeavor and think about, hey, I'm going to be successful here just because I'm me. I think that's futile. I think that's probably a little bit naive and ignorant, because the likelihood of succeeding just because you're you, there's a lot of other people out there doing very similar things who are going to be just as driven, if not more so. And that's just the nature of the game. So that's where I think when Mike Maples Jr. and Andy Radcliffe are talking, their points make a lot of sense. Because if you have that passion, if you have that drive to be successful, and you have that, your X factors, let's just call them, whatever it is about you, and then you also find something that is not yet being tapped, your likelihood of success skyrockets, because your existence of current competition is virtually zero. Whereas, as we talked about before, if you're trying to get into photography on YouTube, the amount of competition and noise in that space is very large. So the likelihood of you succeeding for the simple fact that it is just you is minimal, because I don't think that the quote X factor is the largest factor or the most the heavy weighing factor in the likelihood of being successful and the different attributes that lead to success, right? So, but I do think it is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and to think about, yes, seeing what other people are doing and finding a way to improve upon that is important. But I think that in itself kind of falls flat a little bit in some situations, because if you're looking at what other people are doing and you're looking at a way to improve upon that, what I would worry is that the individual would then look at it and say, yes, I'm going to find a way to do what they're doing better, which is in essence just being them to a quote higher level. Where in reality, maybe in an effort to do what they're doing better, you just have to do you in the same environment in which they are doing them. Not to say that you are any better than them, but there will be people who just prefer the way that you say things. Very simple example, Beatles and Queen. In a general sense, I think the majority of people would say that Queen and the Beatles were good bands, and if you don't think like their music, if you don't think they were good bands, they had a big influence on the musical industry. So if we look at those two bands, there are people who will listen to Queen day in and day out, but there are people who will never listen to the Beatles, and vice versa, right? So is that to say that the Beatles were any less successful than Queen, or that the Queen was any more successful than the Beatles? I don't think so. It just simply comes down to the people liked what the Beatles were producing. They're both producing music, but they're both doing it in their own style, in their own way. So sometimes we can wrap this all up in saying that it's not so much about finding, a new untapped market, because music is not by any sense an untapped market, but it's just finding a new way to iterate on that market by simply doing you and doing what it is that you find interesting and passionate. I think there's some thought to this. I think what that helps, what's the point of considering this UX factor in the markers for success? What's the point? Well, I think what it comes down to those moments where you may not be seeing the results that you want, and then in return, you kind of act irrationally and quickly to try and all of a sudden get more views, but not realizing that everything does take time. And to have confidence in the fact that by doing it your way, you are already separating yourself from the other parts of the competitive field. And the main point here is it just comes back down to that you can't compare yourself in your life to the lives of other people. And now we can get into a whole conversation about that in another time. But if we're not going to compare our own lives to the lives of other people, then why mimic our content off of the content of other people? We can look at what is successful and what type of iterations on creativity work, but we need to consider the fact that we have something to offer of ourselves that can improve upon the entire idea of whatever creative field that we are in, and to not just simply evolve and iterate somebody else's kind of mind child, if you will. So I think there's some stuff to be thought about here. I hope that communicated in a way that was understandable. This would be a very interesting conversation to have. So if you're interested in having this conversation, we definitely should do that and talk about this a little bit more, because I think there's a lot of really valuable potential here and to think about, and how the markers for success and how the XFactor of you plays into that. I think the takeaway from this should really just be that you're awesome. You have something to offer. You have a message worth sharing. You have an idea worth spreading. You have a personality that should be imbued upon some aspect of your passion in the creative field. And you should embrace that, not try and hide it to simply raise your numbers, because ultimately I think what is going to matter more in the long run is being genuine, not just going for the quick hit on your social media accounts, right? So the point is take away is that you are you and you are awesome. Use you. So hope you guys found that useful today. I've been thinking a lot about it recently, so I appreciate you letting me talk to you about it, get it off my chest. I think it's time for a little bit of a quick fact of the day. What do you think? So today's little fact of the day comes from thefactsite.com. Definitely check them out. Pulled a lot of facts from here. It's a really fun site to go through. So this one's interesting. The oldest "your mom" joke was discovered on a 3,500-year-old Babylonian tablet. What? So let me read about it a little bit. There's just a little blurb here. It was discovered in Iraq in 1976. However, since then, the tablet itself has been lost, but the text that was on the tablet remains preserved. So obviously they did I would imagine at that point it would be, can we do computer scans of tablets now and kind of scan in the text with like lasers and stuff? I imagine we can. Otherwise, it would probably be like the sheet of paper and do like the rubbing, like the charcoal rubs and stuff like that. So point is, 3,500-year-old Babylonian tablet contains the oldest "your mom" joke. I want to read what that was. If I find it, we'll bring it out tomorrow and I'll let you know. But again, that was from thefactsite.com. Really, really fun stuff over there. Check them out. I hope you guys found some value in the episode today. It went a bit longer, but I loved it. I love talking to you guys. I love when we have these topics that we can draw out a little bit and really kind of delve into. And I think it's pretty awesome. I have a very, very fun podcast coming up for you this Saturday. Stay tuned for it for sure. I think you're going to love it. All right, guys. Appreciate every single one of you. Love every single one of you. Hope you all have a very highly successful day. Keep working to leave the world a better place on whatever mission, motive, or motto you are currently embarked upon. And with that, this has been the All About How podcast from growingau.com. I was your host, John Knott, as always, and I will catch you all tomorrow on day 26. Peace out.